That is exactly what the Pittsburgh Steelers needed to do when they went across the pond to Dublin, Ireland. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to my Week 4 recap of the Pittsburgh Steelers' 24-21 victory over the Minnesota Vikings. And I'll just say this, that's more like it. That's exactly what we wanted to see in Dublin on all fronts, right? We'll get to the run game. We'll get to DK Metcalf. And of course, we will get to the 5% of that game that didn't go the Steelers' way, that could create some pause in Steelers fans' minds. But let's not let that cloud us from the 95% of the game where the Steelers played terrific, where they built a 24-6 lead, where they played not just the best that they've played this season, but they played the best that they've played dating back to midway through last season as well. And I don't think you can start anywhere else than the much maligned defensive line of the Pittsburgh Steelers. That position group has been catching fire all season long from the jump to this point, and they showed up to Croke Park on Sunday with a point to prove. Now, I understand the Minnesota Vikings were down 2 starting offensive linemen, but when something like that happens, if you have a defensive line that is supposed to be as good as the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line is supposed to be, you need them to then dominate every single snap. And for the most part, they did. They held Jordan Mason to just 57 total rush yards and just 3.6 yards per carry. They held Minnesota as a whole to 70 total rush yards, which anytime you're under that 100 number, that's exactly what you want to see, especially for a defense that is a work in progress when it comes to stopping the run. And then, of course, they did what they do best. They got to Carson Wentz. 6 total sacks in this game. Let's rewind a little bit. The end of week 2, the home opener. A lot of people very upset with the way that game went. And one of the biggest reasons that people were upset through 2 weeks of the season was that the defensive line was not able to do what they do best, get to the quarterback. After week 1, you looked at it and you said, okay, you know what? It's Justin Fields. It's a hard guy to track down. It's a hard guy to box in. But Sam Darnold was able to elude them. Sam Darnold was able to avoid sacks on most occasions. That's just not Pittsburgh Steelers football. Well, fast forward to today, and all of a sudden they had 6 sacks in Dublin, and they have 11 sacks in the past 2 weeks combined on Drake May and Carson Wentz. And it wasn't just the sacks where they were dialing up pressure. They were getting pressure on Carson Wentz all day long. Now, as far as individual performances on the defensive side of the football, you could go in many different directions. You could go with TJ Watt because he got a sack in a second consecutive game, which is a welcome sign for the Steelers. He made a ridiculous interception at the line of scrimmage, which again is a welcome sign for the Steelers. You can give credit to Deshaun Elliott in his return game because he proved exactly why he is so important and he's such a pivotal piece to this defense, getting an interception, getting a pass deflection on 4th down in the game at the end of this one. You can give credit, and I've heard a lot of people, rightfully so, giving credit to Payton Wilson, because if he doesn't make the play he does, maybe we're talking about a loss in Ireland, which would have been devastating considering the circumstances. But I think if you're going to talk about an individual performer this week, and really the last 2 weeks, you have to talk about Nick Herbig. He has been extremely, extremely good this season. Now, I won't go as far as to say, hey, this is his breakout year, because I think Nick Herbig is doing a lot of what we've seen Nick Herbig do throughout his career. He's just doing it more frequently because he's getting more opportunity this year. Alex Highsmith has been out in the past, but right now, Nick Herbig is being told, you're not just, hey, we're going to fill you in, we're going to put in Jeremiah Moon, we're going to put in Marcus Golden, we're going to rotate that position while Alex Highsmith is out. He is essentially being told, You are now Alex Highsmith. Eventually, whenever you need a blow, Jack Sawyer will come in, and he's done well. But Nick Herbig is being given the reins to the number 2 spot on the outside, and he's taking charge. He had 1.5 sacks on Sunday, 3 quarterback hits, and the biggest of all of them was if Payton Wilson's play was the biggest play of the game on defense, the second biggest was Nick Herbig and what he was able to do on the last drive against the Minnesota Vikings. Forcing that intentional grounding on the final drive, setting up, I believe it was a 2nd and long, and then they dumped it down to TJ Hawkinson, had to spike the ball, setting up eventually a 4th and 12 for the game. All of that was started by Nick Herbig getting to Carson Wentz, creating that pressure, and forcing that intentional grounding. He has 2.5 sacks, 1 interception, 1 forced fumble, and a pass deflection in 3 games. Now, if we're talking about pace, he's on pace to shatter every single statistical record that he's set up in his young career. Can he continue that once Alex Highsmith comes back? That's a different question for a different day. But as of right now, you look at Nick Herbig, and he has had 2 stellar games, really 3 stellar games since returning from injury after he missed week 1. He had a great performance in Minnesota and deserves his flowers as we roll forward through the bye week. Now, let's turn attention a little bit to the offensive side of the football, because there have been questions on both sides. Defense, it was the defensive line. Offense, a lot of it was the offensive line. What would they be able to do, especially whenever we wake up Sunday morning to the news that Jaylen Warren, who I said last week is the key cog in this offense when it comes to weapons, was going to miss this one. The offensive line responded, and they responded in a big way, because while the Vikings offensive line was injured, the Vikings defense was missing one piece, and that was Andrew Van Ginkel. It's a big piece. He creates a lot of chaos, but that's not enough to say, hey, let's put an asterisk next to the offensive line's performance for the Steelers, because they handled the Vikings defense very well. Kenneth Gainwell rushes for 99 yards on the day, 5.2 yards per rush. Just a really stout performance from the rushing attack for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Kenneth Gainwell looked very, very electric back there, hitting holes with aggression, hitting holes fast, and making people miss. But the offensive line was getting the push, and that was the difference in this one. They were able to just move the pile forward and allow Gainwell to not just get to the line, but get 2, sometimes 3, sometimes 5 yards down the field before he's even getting touched. That's exactly what the Steelers envisioned when they invested all that draft capital on this offensive line. 1st-round picks on your tackles, 2nd-round pick on your starting center, a 4th-round pick on your starting right guard. All these guys are young. We wanted them to mesh, and Sunday was a good sign going forward. Now, they have to build on it. I'm not ready to crown them yet, but that was 1,000% exactly what you want to see as the season goes on. Let them keep building and stacking performances like we saw on Sunday, and by the end of the season, you'll feel much better about where this offensive line stands. Now, again, there was a bumpy start because Zach Frazier looked as lost as he has looked in the NFL on the first play of the game. A little bit of confusion there, but for the most part, again, very solid performance from the Steelers offensive line, something to build upon going into next week. Another big thing that we got to talk about, DK Metcalf arrives. He's been good through the first 3 weeks. He's made plays. He's scored touchdowns. He's done what you've wanted DK Metcalf to do. But he finally showed us that freak play. That play where you look at it and you just say, man, he's different. And that was an 80-yard touchdown on a slant where he absolutely blew past every single member of the Minnesota Vikings defense. Finishes with his first 100-yard game as a Steeler, 5 receptions for 126 yards. It just shows you what DK Metcalf can do when he's used to the best of his ability. 126 yards, making a slant and turning it into an 80-yard touchdown. Great block thrown by Calvin Austin in that one. And he changes the game early in the game because they were going blow for blow early. Justin Jefferson was tearing up the Steelers defense in the first quarter. but DK Metcalf was able to come back and kind of go hand in hand, go blow for blow, like I mentioned. And that's exactly what you need, especially whenever you're in a division where eventually you're going to have to go up against Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Eventually you're going to have to go up against Zay Flowers. Eventually you're going to have to go up against Jerry Jeudy. And while the quarterback play on some of those teams might be questionable right now, the ability of those receivers to create chaos and create havoc is very real. And now that the Steelers feel that they have somebody that can do that on a consistent basis in DK Metcalf, I think you're a lot more comfortable going forward. Now he shows that, and he arrives and he has his first 100-yard game as a Steeler in Dublin, Ireland. Great to see DK do what he did. Now, I will say this. There was 5% of the game that didn't go well, and I'm not going to harp on this for very long. The Steelers go for it on 4th and goal, mainly because it looked like Aaron Rodgers was calling for the offense to stay on the field. The offensive line was backing him, and it felt in that moment, might not have actually been the case, but it felt in that moment that they overruled what Mike Tomlin initially wanted to do, which was put the points on the board. But the good thing is, hey, Tomlin allowed it. That means that there is a give and take between the quarterback and the head coach. That means that the head coach is allowing the quarterback to kind of feel where the Steelers are at in this game and make a decision based on being in the heat of it. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. Steelers unable to capitalize, but it's fine because at that point, you're up 24-14 and you're going to force this Minnesota Vikings offense to try to go all the way down the field on you and score twice. Well, blown coverage, Jordan Addison, we already talked about it. Huge play by Payton Wilson, but that accounts for 81 yards really quickly. And all of a sudden, you're a little worried. Okay? Minnesota goes through, ends up scoring a touchdown on that one, goes up 24-21. And all of a sudden, you recover the onside kick, Roman Wilson. We'll talk about him in a video either later this week or early next week. And you end up with a 4th and 1. Similar situation, only this time you're at the Minnesota 40-yard line. Minnesota has no timeouts left. And there's about 1 minute and some change left on the clock. And what do you end up doing? You take a delay of game penalty and you punt the ball through the end zone. Now, Danny Smith took credit for punting the ball through the end zone. He said that was his idea. But here's the thing. First and foremost, it worked. The defense got the stop. Nick Herbig made a big play. Deshaun Elliott made a big play. James Pierre almost made a big play on the first play of that drive where he narrowly missed a game-winning interception. But at the end of the day, it worked. So you can't get overly upset about it because it worked. They won. They're 3-1 going into the bye. But I certainly see the frustration for Steelers fans. Because if you're Mike Tomlin, you're how many years into this? And you've preached for how many years that you don't live in your fears? Sometimes you should just practice what you preach. Are you an aggressive head coach? Are you a conservative head coach? Because you can't not live in your fears and punt on 4th and inches for the game. When your offensive line has been performing very well. Yeah, I understand. They didn't score on the 4th and 3 where you ran an off tackle to the left. But 4th and inches, 4th and 1 at most, maybe 1.5. It feels like if you were going to be aggressive on 4th and whatever it was on that drive before, maintain that aggressiveness. Win the game. As Aaron Rodgers said to Pam Oliver in the post-game press conference, or the on-field interview, I should say, we got to finish that game on offense. And that's what they had a chance to do. And instead, they punt the ball through the end zone. They forced their defense to make a stop, and their defense made the stop. But sometimes it's just, not everybody has the luxury of having a head coach that is exactly who he says he is. The Detroit Lions have that. We're going to win by the sword, or we're live by the sword, die by the sword. That's what they always say in Detroit, because they go for it on 4th down all the time. Being aggressive on one, being passive on the next, that can get a little frustrating. It worked this time, but when it doesn't, boy, is that going to blow up in Mike Tomlin's face, because he does have himself on record many, many times talking about not living in his fears. And whenever you punt on fourth in the game, when it's only a couple of inches and your offensive line has been performing and your run game has been performing 5 yards a clip for Kenneth Gainwell, there's going to be some people that feel some type of way. Now, at the end of the day, 95% of the game, very good. Everything the Steelers could have wanted out of this weekend and more, not just for what happened in Ireland. You get the win in Ireland, it's huge. It's huge for the Steelers. It's huge for the Rooney family. We understand that, and it's great that the Steelers were able to pull through for their ownership. But now they have sole possession of first in the AFC North, thanks to a loss on Monday night by the Cincinnati Bengals. And the Ravens drop a game that is now, I would call, winnable on the Steelers' schedule. You have a 2-game lead on the Ravens, but you look at the Steelers 3-1, and you look at the Ravens 1-3, and you have to understand, they lost to the Detroit Lions. All right, that's coming up on the Steelers' schedule. That's going to be hard to take advantage of. They lost to the Buffalo Bills. Okay, that's coming up on the Steelers' schedule. That's going to be a tough one for the Steelers to take advantage of. That's when you get a game advantage, is when you have success against teams that your division rivals already failed against. It's going to be hard to take advantage of a Detroit loss. It's going to be hard to take advantage of a, Detroit win, of a Buffalo win over the Ravens, because it's going to be hard for the Steelers to beat those teams. However, with the Baltimore Ravens dropping a game against the Kansas City Chiefs, that helps the Steelers because that is now a winnable game on the Steelers' schedule. They don't play the Chiefs, but you know who's in that slot for the Steelers instead of the Chiefs? It's the LA Chargers. The Chargers looked very good for the first 3 weeks of the season. Then they went up to MetLife and they lost to Jackson Dart and the New York Giants. I'm not saying that buries them. All I'm saying is that now helps the Steelers on November 9th against the Chargers on, I believe, that's Sunday Night Football. That makes that a much more winnable game looking forward than it did going into this week. And that is really where the Steelers can take advantage of the Ravens' slow start. That's a game that they can bank to where they don't have to pay it back later in the season whenever they have to go up against a tough opponent that already slotted in against the Ravens, like the Lions, like the Bills. So all in all, the Steelers got almost everything they wanted out of week 4. Now they get to go to the bye, which comes at a great time for them. Alex Highsmith dealing with an injury. Joey Porter still dealing with an injury. Jaylen Warren can heal up a little bit. And we get to obviously see how things play out with Jalen Ramsey and Calvin Austin. But the Steelers, they need to get healthy because they need to still make some hay here in the early portion of this season. I already mentioned the games that are coming up at the tail end. Detroit, Buffalo, Green Bay is going to be on the schedule sooner rather than later. So when you're playing teams like Cleveland, great defense, offensively, you need to take advantage. When you're playing teams like Cincinnati, who's gotten the doors blown off of them on both sides of the football over the past 2 weeks, you need to start banking these wins because as we saw last year, the tail end is not going to be easy, and you're going to have to rely on the resume you built in the early portions of this season. But that's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, we have new videos every single week, so make sure that you subscribe, you like, you share, you do all that fun stuff at Nick Belsky on YouTube. But that's it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.